Today we're going to talk about circles. So, for the standard form for the equation of a circle, is going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So this is going to give the equation for a circle that has a center at hk and a radius of r. So this circle has a center hk, radius r. Sorry, that beeping threw me off a little bit. It's like the UV sanitizer thing was done with this cycle. Okay. Standard form. So if you remember from transformations, when we were shifting left and right, that was inside the parenthesis with the x. So remember that if we subtracted, it was shifting right. If we added, it was shifting left. That's going to do kind of the same thing here. So like this guy right there, when it's with the y, it's up and down. So this one's actually going to be down because it's inside the parenthesis with the y. So we have two shifts happening. We shift the x coordinate right if it's subtracted, left if it's added. We shift the y coordinate up if it's subtracted, down if it's added. For general form, which I guess we should probably practice that at some point in our notes today. Look ahead and see if I do. It doesn't look like yeah, I will. Okay, perfect. General form, you're going to FOIL and simplify. So the standard form equation. So you would FOIL this, combine all of your terms, and you're going to end up in standard form. It's going to start with an x squared, and then you're going to have your y squared, and then you're going to have your x term, your y term, and then another constant, and then it's going to equal 0. So that'll be general form. A unit circle, if you remember from pre-calc, a unit circle has a radius of 1, so and a center at 0, 0. So it's slightly different from standard form in that when we put in a 0 here and a 0 here, we're going to end up with x squared plus y squared. And since the radius is 1, it will equal 1. So unit circle has a center 0, 0 and a radius of 1. Okay, let's practice finding the center and radius of this circle that is in standard form. So standard form would be x minus h squared. This one doesn't have anything in with the x, so it's technically x minus 0 squared, and then plus y minus negative 1/2 squared equals 4. If you want to think of it like that, another way to think of it is to set that parenthesis equal to 0, so like y plus 1/2 equals 0, and that gives you the y coordinate of your center at negative 1/2. Of course, the x coordinate is going to be at 0, so the center will be at 0, negative 1/2. And then the radius, remember this is r squared equals 4. Again, technically, when we would take the square root of both sides of this, we would get that the radius is plus and minus 2. I mean, that's kind of true because I'm going to the right and to the left and up and down and all the directions. But radius is going to be like a measure of how long that is, so we're going to use only the positives. So the radius would be 2. Okay, now we're going to go the other direction. So I'm going to tell you the center, and we're going to put it in standard form. So we've got our center here. This is our HK, and we've got our radius of 8. That's the R in the formula. So for that standard form for the equation of the circle, we're going to do x minus the x coordinate of the center plus y minus the y coordinate of the center is going to equal the radius squared. So we go x minus the x coordinate of the center plus y minus -4 would be plus 4 squared equals, and we have to remember to do r squared, so that would be 8 squared, 64. So putting a circle in standard form, if you know its center and radius, is very straightforward. Putting it in general form isn't difficult, but it is going to require us to do some work. Whoops, knock something off the edge. So what we're going to do is we will FOIL the x minus 7 squared, and we will FOIL the y plus 4 squared. So that's going to be x squared, and then we'd have minus 7x, so minus 14x, and then plus 49. And then the y's, y squared, plus 4y, plus 4y here, so 8y, and then plus 16 still equals 64. Then we want to combine our like terms and move this 64 over to the other side. So we're combining 49, 16, negative 64. Y'all, I can't do that in my head. Okay. 49, 16, minus 64. Oh, that's 1. Interesting. So then we'll also put this in order of the x squared first, x squared, then the y squared, then the x, then the y, and then the number, which ended up to be plus 1. So that will be general form. To graph a circle on a graphing calculator. Graphing calculators don't really like things that aren't functions. They won't graph things that aren't functions. So we're going to have to graph the top half of the circle and the bottom half of the circle separately. They also don't like areas that are kind of almost vertical. So like as we go around this circle, the tangent line to the circle becomes vertical, like right over here. The calculator is not going to like that. So your circle might not look like completely closed. So it's not the best way to graph, but it'll do. We'll just have to make it work. So the first thing we're going to want to do is solve for y equals. We're going to be using the square root method. Okay, so just as a refresher, the square root method, what you're going to do is we're going to isolate the y minus k squared. So we're going to isolate the y plus 6 squared in this one. Then you're going to square root both sides. And we're going to remember on the number side to use the plus or minus on that side. Okay, step 1. So I'm going to subtract this x minus 8 squared. So I'll have y plus 6 squared equals 36 minus x minus 8 squared. Then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And I'll have y plus 6 on this side and plus or minus this whole thing on the other side. So y plus 6, because I square rooted a square, plus or minus this whole thing. Now, I know that if you guys were here, at least one person would ask me, can we make this into this, since they're both squared? Are these two things equal to each other? Let's try this with numbers. So let's try this with 25 minus 16. Well, 25 is 5 squared. 16 is 4 squared. So basically what you're asking me is, can I rewrite this as just 5 minus 4, which would equal 1? Well, if we're doing the order of operations on this problem, we would need to do our subtraction in here because it's considered inside a parenthesis first. So that would be square root of 9, which would come out to be 3. So you cannot just square root these independently because of this subtraction sign. If you have adding or subtracting inside your radical, you can't just square root both of them individually. So here we sit with y plus 6 equals all of that. Then we're going to move this 6 over to the side over here. So subtract 6. And I want you to always put that before the plus or minus sign. So we're going to have y equals negative 6 plus or minus square root of 36 minus x minus 8 squared. Don't worry about foiling that out because we're just going to type it in our calculator anyway. We're going to have to graph both of the equations though. So we're going to have to graph two different equations. So in y1, we'll do our number, in this case is negative 6 plus our square root. And in y2, we'll do the number minus the square root. And then we have to use zoom number 5, which is zoom square. If you don't use zoom square, it's not going to look like a circle. I'll show you what it'll look like if we do that. So we've got negative 6 plus the square root of 36 minus parenthesis x minus 8 squared. And then we're going to do negative 6 subtract that square root. And we will look at the graph. So you can see that doesn't really look like a circle at this point. I am going to adjust my window down further on the Y so that I can see more of my circle. There we go. And then I'm going to push zoom number 5 square. So zoom and then 5. And it'll look more like a circle, but again, you can see on the edges here where it gets to be that vertical tangent line, it just doesn't like to graph it. So if we can kind of close it in, you can see it's a circle. That's what it'll look like. It's a good way to check and make sure you've graphed your circle correctly, but not a great way to just graph it for the sake of graphing it. Okay, now we're going to write an equation for a circle whose diameter has endpoints at 4, 1 and negative 4, 1. So we've got this circle. Remember, diameter goes all the way through the circle, like through the center to both sides, to touch both ends on the circle. So if I draw my diameter through my center, and I have endpoints at 4, 1 and negative 4, negative 1. We need to, in order to be able to find the equation for a circle, we need to know two pieces of information. We need to know where the center of the circle is. It'll have a T in it. And we need to know the radius of the circle. So to find the center, that center is going to be at the midpoint of the diameter. So the center is going to be the midpoint of the diameter. And remember, for midpoint, we're going to find the average of the x values and the average of the y values. So midpoint or center, we'll take 4 plus negative 4 divided by 2, 1 plus negative 1 divided by 2, which is going to be 0, 0. Then the radius is going to be the distance from the center to the edge of the circle, or we could find the length of the diameter and divide it by 2. So that's going to be your choice about how to do that. We can either find the distance from center to a point on the circle, or we can do half of the diameter, which we would have to find the distance between these 2 points and then divide by 2. So if we find the radius, I'm going to do the distance between the center and this point, 4, 1. Remember, to do distance formula, we're going to subtract the x's squared plus subtract the y's squared. And then we take the square root of that whole thing. So distance, which is radius, that's a little bit confusing. Maybe that's, well, I mean, that would be d. So let's make this one r because it's the radius. Okay, so square root of, I'm doing 4 minus 0 squared and 1 minus 0 squared. So that will be square root of 16 plus 1. So the radius is square root of 17. And then to find the equation of the circle, we go back to our handy-dandy standard form. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So our h is 0, our k is 0, and the r squared we're going to get from the r here. So we'll have x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals r squared, which ends up giving us x squared plus y squared equals square root of 17 squared is regular old 17. So there's the equation for our circle in standard form. If they wanted it in general form, I would subtract the 17 over and make it x squared plus y squared minus 17 equals 0. Oh, we get to graph. Find the equation of a circle with a center at negative 3, 1 that is tangent to y equals 5. Okay. Let's get our XY axes on here. And our circle has a center at negative 3, 1. So right here. And it's tangent to the line y equals 5. Well, y equals 5 is a horizontal line that goes through 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our circle is going to be tangent to this line. Now, in this case, in this context, tangent means it is touching at one point. So we would need to draw our circle so that the center is here and the edge of the circle touches right there. Let's see. This circle is too small, but this is what tangent would look like. It's just touching at that one point. I'm not sure if I have a circle that'll be the right exact size. I think this circle's too big. Let's see. That'll come pretty close. Okay. So let's put our center back on there. We'll pretend that there's the center. Oh, that worked out not too bad. So this center is at -3, 1. And it's tangent at this point right here. We're going to have to, it's a little bit of a stretch of the imagination because we're going to have to pretend it's tangent right here. It should be scooted over just a little bit. I don't think I can move it. Without, oh, maybe I can. Nope, not without tearing my paper. So we'll just leave it there. Just pretend it's tangent right there and not slightly over. So in order to be able to get the equation of our circle, remember that we need two things. We need to know where is the center, and we need to know what is the radius. So we can already know what the center is. The center is -3, 1. And remember that the radius goes from the center to any point that is on the circle. So this point right here that's on the circle, because it's tangent there, is going to be -3, 5. How do we know that? Because the center is directly below it. So the length of this radius is going to be however long it is from -3, 1 to -3, 5. We can do that with the distance formula, or we can realize that it's along that same line, along that same vertical line, but we're only just going to be moving up 4 units. So the length of our radius is 4. So this problem actually doesn't require a lot of work, but it requires some thinking and problem solving. So the center is at -3, 1. The radius is 4. So we go back to our standard form for the equation of a circle, and we do x minus the x number. So x minus -3, which would be x plus 3 squared, plus y minus the y coordinate, which was 1 squared, equals r squared, 4 squared, which would be 16. So in this case, I think drawing a picture definitely makes it worth our time because it makes it super easier to solve. Okay, now for those of you who are algebra fans more than geometry fans, here's some algebra for us. We are going to be given general form and we need to write it in standard form. So going from standard form to general form was algebra as well. It was foiling. So going from general form to standard form is going to be the opposite of foiling, which is factoring, but we are going to do that by using completing the square. And we get to complete the square 2 times, 1 time for the x's and 1 time for the y's. So here we go. Our first step is going to be to group the x's together and group the y's together and get the constant term or the plain number on one side by itself. So we want to get a parenthesis where we group our x's, and then another parenthesis where we group our y's, and then we want it to equal the constant term. So in this case, that 64 is going to be moved over. So for our first step, I'm going to put x squared minus 16 together, 16x. I'm going to leave a space. I'm leaving that space so that I can do completing the square. Plus, group my y's together. So y squared plus 12y. Again, leave a space. And then it's going to equal, we have to subtract the 64 over, negative 64. Then the next thing we're going to do is complete the square 2 times. So we complete the square for x and y. So completing the square. When we complete the square, remember that what we're going to do is we're going to take b divided by 2 and we're going to square it. So we do b divided by 2, then we square it, and whatever number that gives us, we add to both sides. Okay, b divided by 2 squared, add to both sides. So here, negative 16 divided by 2, which is negative 8, square that, which gives us 64. So 64 is what we're going to add to both sides. So I do plus 64 here, and I do plus 64 here. I'm going to do the same thing for y. So I'm going to take b divided by 2, I'm going to square it, I'm going to add that to both sides. So here, b is 12. So I'm doing 12 divided by 2, which is 6 squared. That gives me 36. 36 is what I'm adding to both sides. Plus 36, plus 36. Okay, next step. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to factor both of those. Factor x and factor y. So when we do the factoring for completing the square, it's not like really factoring. We're just going to take x and we're going to take whatever this number is and add it in there. So this number squared plus, do the same thing for y. You do y plus this number squared, and then it's going to equal, we're going to add up the numbers over here. So these numbers that are over here, we add them. Okay, so here we go. Factoring. So we're going to take x plus, this is our number, negative 8 squared. And then we're going to do the same thing for y, plus y plus this number here, 6 squared, equals, add those numbers, negative 64 plus 64 adds up to 0, plus 36 will be 36. And then I'm just going to rewrite that, and that's going to be my answer for completing the square to get the equation of the circle. So that's going to be x minus 8 squared plus y plus 6 squared equals 36. So that tells me that my center is at x minus 8 equals 0, gives me x equals 8. Y plus 6 equals 0 gives me y equals negative 6. And then the radius, remember we take the square root of 36, so that radius would be 6. Now to graph that, let's see, the center's at 8, negative 6, so I'm going to need quite a bit of space here. I'm going to be graphing in mostly quadrant 4. Okay. Do I have enough room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. There's my center. 8, negative 6. And then to graph that radius of 6, I'm basically just going to go from my center. I'm going to count to the right 6. Put a dot. I'm going to count up 6. Put a dot. I'm going to count left 6. Put a dot. And down 6. And put a dot. And then we just try our best to draw a circle. I'm really quite bad at this. So my circles don't usually look that great. Some of you are definitely going to be better at this than I am. And that's okay. My circles tend to look either like footballs or kind of like, I don't know, more like squares that have been turned. But there's my circle-ish figure. That one's not too terrible. Now let's go ahead and do an add-in because we need to be able to find intercepts. Let's see. I think that this one would be a good one to find intercepts on. Finding intercepts. Let's go back to this page. To find the intercepts, we're going to do it just like we have found intercepts in the past. So to find the x-intercept, we're going to sub in 0 for y. To find the y-intercepts, we're going to sub in 0 for x. So we'll just practice this here, in this little spot. So if I sub in 0 for y, I'll have x plus 3 squared plus negative 1 squared equals 16. So then that'll give me x plus 3 squared plus 1 equals 16. Whoops, I need my parentheses. Subtract 1 over. So x plus 3 squared equals 15. Now we're at the square root method. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And we're going to remember to put plus and minus on the 15. So we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 15. Subtract that 3 over on both sides. Remember, it's going to go before the plus or minus. So we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus square root of 15. So that's actually two x-intercepts. Negative 3 plus square root of 15, 0. And negative 3 minus square root of 15, 0. Y-intercepts will do the same thing except for subbing in 0 for x. So that will give us 3 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 16. So 9 plus y minus 1 squared equals 16. Subtract that 9 over. Y minus 1 squared equals 7. Square root both sides. I got on the equal sign a little. There we go. So y minus 1 would equal plus or minus square root of 7. Add the 1 over. Remember to put it in front of that plus or minus. So we have y equals 1 plus or minus square root of 7. So then my other two intercepts will be 0, 1 plus square root of 7, and 0, 1 minus square root of 7.